He is one of the most legendary singer-songwriters of our time, with an amazing career selling over 55 million albums worldwide, lead singer of one of the biggest bands in the world, singer-songwriter and guitarist Justin Hayward of the Moody Blues. Mr. Hayward, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm in good form. I'm a bit jet-lagged. I'm coming through the UK on the way back from a Moody tour, but the Twilight Zone is not bad, here.
So true, so true. And so, Justin, I heard that music became a huge influence in your life very early on when you were just a child, correct?
Well, my earliest memories, I think, were probably to do with music, yeah.
And so who were the artists that you really looked up to when you were growing up?
The first pop singer that I really was moved by was a guy called Johnny Ray, who sang with a kind of a cry in his voice, which really, it sort of got me as a little kid. And then I come from a family with a very strong faith, so the hymns in the Hymns Ancient and Modern, which is a hymn book that's used in the Anglican Church, and some of those melodies I always thought were wonderful. It all became clear when Elvis, of course, but it all became clear with Buddy Holly, and I suppose I was about 10 then. And then suddenly I was focused on what I really had to do in life.
And one of my ultimate favorite albums of all time has got to be Days of Future Past. And tell me how you guys came up with the idea to use the London Festival Orchestra on that recording.
Well, I wish we could claim that we did come up with that idea, but we didn't. We had nothing. We had less than nothing, in fact. We had debt. And the record company, Decca, and London Records in America, needed a group to demonstrate their stereo system. It was their idea to make an album, and they had the Peter Knight, who is the conductor and the orchestrator, and the London actually the London Festival Orchestra is a name that we just made up. It just sounds good, but it doesn't really exist. It's a collection of players from the London Symphony and the London Philharmonic and classical players. But it had nothing to do with us. We just had our songs, and the idea was from the suits at Decca to make this demonstration record because they wanted to sell stereo systems and stereo units to people that were interested in rock and roll. It was just that we happened to be right there on the spot, and they pointed their finger at us, and we had the songs, and it was Peter Knight's idea to do, for us to do use our stage show, and he would interpret them in a kind of classical way. So I'm afraid, JJ, we can claim no credit at all. And don't listen to anybody else in the band who says that we should get credit, because we shouldn't.
So when you were 19 years old, Justin, you wrote an absolute masterpiece titled Nights in White Satin, and I heard that it was kind of like a play on words, meaning that you had bed sheets that were white satin, which helped you come up with the idea for that song, or what was the personal influence or message for you on that tune?
Well, I had written quite a lot of things before that. We wanted to do a stage show rather pretentiously that was kind of about a day or a half of 45 minutes. So we used to do two 45-minute sets. And we wanted to do one of those sets as a kind of theme thing, with some loose story connected to it. And so that we could play it all the way through. And so we just thought about the idea of a day in the life of one guy, sort of everyman. And then Mike Pinder, our keyboard player, was working on a song that he asked me to sing called Dawn is a Feeling. And I thought, what a lovely idea. And so I just wrote a kind of counterpoint to that, about the night. I came home from a gig one night and just sat on the side of the bed and wrote the basic song. And yes, it's a series of thoughts by a sort of love-struck kid. I was at the end of one big love affair at the beginning of another, and when you're 19 or 20, that's huge. I was just 20 years old, and that kind of stuff is huge in your life. And a girlfriend, neither of the ones that I was at the end of the love affair with or beginning of another, neither of those two girls gave me some white satin sheets, another girlfriend. So the first line was kind of about that. It was meant to be a sort of double entendre, really, of different meanings. And, of course, I thought in my wildest dreams what on earth would happen to the song. I thought it was just going to be, it was just something that happened at the time. It wasn't. It was the opposite of every kind of hit record that was going on at the time.
And Days of Future Past album was and still is one of my favorite albums in my music catalog because my parents were influenced on the music of the 1950s and 60s, so that album really stood out to me when I was a child because it was so very, very different than everything else that was on American radio at the time. And the tune Tuesday Afternoon, the idea to use the Melotron on that particular tune, what sort of brought that idea on?
Well, before that, Mike, our keyboard player, had been using piano and a Vox Continental organ. And try as we may, I came to the group as a songwriter, really. I was writing songs when I was with Marty, but I could not, apart from a song called Fly Me High, which we had some success with before Days of Future Past, I could not get my songs. We could do cover versions, but I couldn't get my songs to work with piano or Vox Continental organ. And Mike had knew about this instrument of sound effects called the Melotron. Most, like I say, 3/4 of it was sound effects with cockerels crowing in the morning and trains rushing through tunnels and weird Spike Jones kind of sounds. But it did have some orchestral sounds on it. Mike threw away all the sound effects and doubled up the orchestral sounds and came up with that sound that you hear on Tuesday Afternoon and Nights in White Satin. That's a Melotron. It's not on Nights in White Satin and Tuesday. It's Melotron. It's not orchestra, even though it sounds like orchestra. It's the pre-synthesizer kind of, string and brass sounds.
And it's so incredible what those producers and engineers came up with back then in the 1960s. They didn't have computers. They didn't have anything even close to a computer. And basically on reel-to-reel, slice and dice and paste this together, tape this together. And it's just amazing what those guys could do, of course, with the help from the Moody Blues on their songwriting abilities. And there was so much great music that was brought to us by the Moody Blues during that time period. And during the late 1960s, Vietnam War had a huge influence on every musician, on every person in the world. And the tune Question, now another great classic from the Moody Blues. Now, did you write that about the questioning of the Vietnam War?
Well, we were a group in the 60s who were playing to college audience, college kids. Conscription, or what you called the draft, had finished only about 3 years before. So we were free as a generation, of my particular generation of young people. So we were free of the problem of being conscripted into the armed forces. But in America, of course, when we came in 1968, there was all of these kids who had this sword of Damocles hanging over them. I think, yes, Question was a reflection of what young people were saying and the people that we were surrounded by. We were one of the few English bands that really was accepted into the American kind of musical scene. We were privileged to be part of that in America because it's the land of our heroes, really. And so yes, Question was that. It did have that expression. I think it still resonates today, actually, in its sentiment.
And during the 1980s, the Moody Blues continued success with the great track called The Voice. Tell me about that.
You can't imagine what it was like for us, really, because I think we had about 5 years in the 70s when people were kind of assuming that it was all over for us. And with The Voice and Wildest Dreams, and I Know You're Out There Somewhere, it was the first time, really, that I'd experienced, I missed it the first time round when I was a kid, with the first few albums. I was a bit too stoned, I wasn't paying attention, and I wasn't enjoying it. I was like in a kind of race with my head down, and a lot of things were going on in my life, very difficult things. But the 80s came along, and The Voice came along, and Wildest Dreams, and for the first time in my life, I knew what actual commercial success was like, of being recognized by a few people in the street because of they'd seen you on TV, and to have that experience, to be given the gift of it the second time around, really after the 60s and early 70s, was just such a blessing that I'll always be grateful for. And I think actually I have to say that the bulk of our audience is probably from that 80s time, that were turned on to the Moody's in the 80s and then looked back to the things that we'd made in the 60s.
And Justin, I got to tell you, one of my favorite songs from the Moody Blues out of the 1980s, Your Wildest Dreams. What a great track that was from you guys. Now, was that tune really inspired by a real person that happened to be in your life at the time?
I think it was based actually on, yes, one person more than the others, but there were two or three. And I think it's a common experience of people do want to know what happened to the first person they were really deeply in love with. I think that's a common experience. It's probably much easier to find out now with social networks than it was then. But it was certainly a common experience. And I was very lucky to have Tony Visconti as our record producer because, he made that record, and I Know You're Out There Somewhere, and his influence is all over it. And, we just had so much fun and so much joy in making those records as well as touring with them and playing them. And to this day, we have that kind of fun with them.
So, Justin, I know you're like a machine that never quits, and I know you just launched another U.S. tour here in the States, another U.K. tour just around the corner, and tell me about all the new music you've been working on these days.
Well, I have a great relationship and a partner in Italy called Alberto Parodi, and then we work together on a lot of projects. Not always Moody Blues or Justin things, but we were lucky enough to be asked to do a theme for a movie that's going into production later on this year. I can't actually tell you the title yet because I'm not allowed to. I'll be doing at least one song from that in the forthcoming solo tour. But I think, that's always been my sort of paradise, really, the studio. And, I'm so thankful to have Alberto in my life. And for the last 20 years now, we've worked together on everything I've done for the Moody's and all the remastering and remixing that the record company wanted. It's still my world of imagination and writing, and I'm very pleased to say that it's stronger than ever.
And Justin, I could not agree with you more, my friend. Join Justin Hayward of the Moody Blues at his sold-out show at the Coach House in San Juan Capistrano on June 10th. For more information on Justin Hayward and the latest updates on him and his band, visit justinhayward.com. Mr. Justin Hayward of the Moody Blues, thank you so very much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my great pleasure. Lovely talking to you. My love to you and on all of the friends. Looking forward to coming your way.